Okay, we return to lesson 17 as we continue our study in the parables. Last week we were cut off because of the thunderstorm and our internet provider. And this parable is going to deal with lostness, the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the prodigal son. Now, the prodigal son was never called lost, but simply prodigal, which means somebody who has wandered off following their own heart and emotions. And the central idea of this parable is, what is our attitude toward the lost? Now, if you have your Bibles open to Luke 15, you discover this premise in the first two verses. Now, all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near him to listen to him. Well, why was that? Because Christ built relationships. The Pharisees and the Sadducees' relationships were based on performance. If a person performed, meaning they kept the law like the Pharisees kept the law, then they were accepted. And even if they kept the law and they didn't do it according to how the Pharisees thought they should do it, they were excluded. That can be verified by the fact that the Pharisees chided Jesus for the disciples not washing their hands according to the tradition of the elders. So Jesus has got a very solid base of people, sinners, who are looking for solutions and looking for answers. But this bothered the Pharisees in verse 2. Both the Pharisees and the scribes began to grumble. Instead of rejoicing that these tax collectors and these sinners, and sinners would be a broad description of the harlots and the prostitutes and those who stole, etc., they should have been rejoicing that these people were coming back to a right relationship with Jehovah, but instead they grumbled. I think the main reason they were grumbling is because these people who hung around the outskirts of the temple, because they couldn't come in because they were not measuring up to the Pharisees and to the scribes, these people left the temple area and were following Jesus. Jesus had an itinerant ministry. He did not have a synagogue that he regularly preached at or that he pastored. And so they grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." In an earlier episode, they accused him of being a glutton and a wine bibber because he was associating with these people and having meals with them. That would never have transpired in a Pharisee's home. And in fact, we looked at a parable recently where this came up about who they invited to their feasts and who they excluded. So let's get into the lost sheep here, verses 4 through 7. And he tells a parable. Now, this parable includes the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the prodigal son. It's like 3 chapters of a single volume. Many times preachers will address these individually, but there is that common theme of attitude towards the lost. Verse 4, "What man among you, if he has 100 sheep and has lost one of them, does not leave the 99 in the open pasture and go after the one which is lost until he finds it?" Now, this man evidently is very wealthy. He has 100 sheep, and one of them goes astray. Sheep are not real smart animals. That's why the Bible correlates us as sheep. We stray after our own ways. Sheep follow their nose and oftentimes what they see. And greener pastures on the other side is not necessarily healthy and beneficial to them. So, somewhere along the line, this sheep got separated from the rest of the flock. Uh, did the sheep get lost? Did it not hear the master's voice? We don't know, but it's not a part of the 90 and 9. So this rich man goes to look for him, or goes to look for the sheep. And notice in verse 4, he does not stop looking for this sheep until he finds it. Do you see that in verse 4? He leaves the 99 in the open pasture and goes after the one which is lost until he finds it. Now, with that large of a flock, he had other herdsmen helping tend the sheep. So he left the 99 in good shape with other shepherds keeping them protected. And he goes and looks for the one. Why not just write this sheep off? Profit and loss, okay? This year, 13 AD, I lost one sheep. But no, every sheep was important to this man. And so he searches for the one. The idea of search means he diligently traveled in areas where a sheep might tend to wander off to. Did he backtrack? I don't know. But he searched. He just didn't bemoan the fact that one was gone. He didn't consider the loss as acceptable. He went to look. Now in verse 5 it says, when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. Now, this rich man had to be pretty strong because we're not talking about a lamb, we're talking about a sheep. And probably the sheep had not been sheared yet. So he's got this big woolly coat on him. Why is the sheep on his shoulders? Well, tradition says that when a shepherd had a sheep that wandered off, if it wasn't corrected, it would do it again, leading other sheep after it. So tradition says that the shepherd, after he found the sheep, would stretch out one of the front paws and take his staff and crack it against the front leg, breaking the leg. And then he would anoint it with oil, bandage it up, and lift the sheep on his shoulders and carry him. So the shepherd not only applied discipline, but he also provided comfort. And notice he comes back rejoicing. He's not grumbling that he had to go out and find this sheep. He's not grumbling that he has to tote this animal around. He is so happy that he found the sheep and recovered it. In verse 6, and when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost. What about the other 90 and 9? Aren't you happy that they didn't wander off? Well, of course he is. But the one that was lost, that wandered away, was just as important, and the recovery of that sheep was just as important as the 90 and 9. And so he calls his friends together. Maybe it was him having to answer the question, you went out with 100 and you only came back with 99. What kind of shepherd are you? Now that's a presupposition on my part. The point is, there is rejoicing over this one lamb, this one sheep. And Jesus says now in verse 7, I tell you that in the same way there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Now, I think this is a dig that Jesus is making to the Pharisees and to the Sadducees. He says earlier, I did not come to call those who are well or think that they are well. I've come to call those who are sick. I didn't come and call the righteous or those who think they are righteous. I've come to call those who are not righteous. So I think Jesus is putting in a little dig here, saying there is so much joy in heaven over one sinner returning to God as opposed to 99 self-righteous men and women who think that they have a right relationship with God but don't. The missing coin. What woman, if she has 10 silver coins and loses one coin? Now let's stop there for a moment. Why has this woman got 10 silver coins? Okay, that's a lot of money that she has. Well, most commentators believe that the 10 coins were a gift from the husband to the wife. And it was they were either sewn onto a scarf that draped over her shoulders, or more than likely a headband she wore when she went out into public. The number 10 signifying ownership. And so when she went out into public, this headband would indicate to any wannabe boyfriends that she was spoken for, just like the wedding ring on a lady's finger today. It was a distinctive mark of this woman. But if she lost one of the coins, the reputation of her husband and of her would be cast in a dim light. So, what does she do? Verse 8. Does she not light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? All right, now she does not have a Bissell floor vac. Okay? These houses were made of clay and they were dirt floors. So here she is sweeping the house with a homemade straw broom. Now imagine, first of all, the dust that is being kicked up. And imagine the pile of dust that she begins to sift through looking for the coin. It's not in that pile, so she takes that pile and puts it out the front door. She sweeps some more. She goes through that pile. It's not in that pile. And she repeats it again and again and again until she finds the coin, it says in verse 8. And she searches carefully. She applies diligence and effort in finding this because it was valuable and important. Now, when she has found it, it says in verse 9, she calls together her friends and her neighbors, saying, Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin which I had lost. In the same way, Jesus says, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Now, verse 10 is a modification of verse 7, but it's given the same idea about God being extremely joyful, the angels being extremely joyful when something or someone who is lost is found and restored. It brings joy to heaven. Now we come to the prodigal. In verse 11, a man had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me." So he divided his wealth between them. Now you need to stop and understand the cultural relevance and irrelevance that is taking place here. The father would distribute his inheritance, distribute his estate, beginning with the older son, who would receive a double portion, because the older boy would assume the leadership in the home when the father died. Yet this younger upstart comes to his father. He doesn't say, "Please." It's a demanding verb. Give me the share of the estate that falls to me. The second thing that you should notice here, that's not in the text, but you will discover from culture, the inheritance was not divided until the father died. So what is this young man saying in reality? What is he implying? I sure hope you were dead so I get my inheritance. And because you're not, why don't you just give it to me in case you die after I leave? So I know I have what is coming to me. What does the father do? And this is bewildering. But this is a picture of God. The father divided his wealth between them. Now, did you see that? Between them. The younger son didn't just get his portion, and the older brother had to wait until dad died. He decided to divide the estate between both of his sons who are living at that moment. And that's a very interesting perception that we need to make note of here. Now, not many days later, the younger son gathered everything together, went on a journey into a distant country, and there he squandered his estate with loose living. So the boy has gotten his freedom. The father would tell both boys their chores and what they were responsible for. He was tired of working for what he thought was not a whole lot. And so with this large amount of the estate, he could just go off and live his life the way he wanted to. He couldn't do this lifestyle in his father's house. So he has the money, he plans the trip, he takes off to a distant country, and it's not specified what country that is, and he squanders. He spends his estate as if there was no tomorrow, with loose living. If he wanted something, he bought it. If he wanted a filet mignon and it wasn't cooked right, he threw it away and ordered something else. If he wanted a prostitute, he would pay for a prostitute. If he wanted a new set of clothing, he would buy a new set of clothing. In his mind, money is not an object. He had no eye on the future, only the immediate. And that's how oftentimes drug addicts are. The immediate. Now, verse 14, when he had spent everything, I'm sorry, let's back up here. I'm sorry. Okay, come on. I apologize about that. Verse 14, 14. Now when he had spent everything, a severe famine occurred in that country, and he began to be impoverished. Well, he spent everything. Of course, he's going to be impoverished. That means he is broke. The only thing he has are the clothes on his back. Verse 15. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country. Now, he was not opposed to working because he had worked for his father. He knew that if he wanted to continue to try to mount a treasury to return to that lifestyle, he would have to work. However, notice how he lowered his standards as a Jew and the work that he accepted. And he sent him, the person he hired out to, he sent him into his fields to feed swine. That is an unclean animal that a Jew was to have nothing to do with. Now, I don't know whether any of you have ever slopped pigs. That's what we called it down south. I can remember the school I was attending down in Mississippi. We had an old truck, and when I mean old, it had a push button starter on the floor that you had to hit that button and the gas pedal at the same time. It was that old. And we used it to pick up the trash cans of the leftover food from the dining room and from the kitchen and what have you. Probably 2 or 3 55-gallon trash cans. No, 55. Maybe it was 40-gallon. The big tin ones, okay? And we would load them on the truck and go down there. And we would pour the slop out into the troughs. It was a smelly, stinking job. You had to take a shower after you got done, and you wore your clothes only once because it would splash up on your clothes. But the pigs loved it. And so this man has lowered his standards. He is violating his cultural ethnicity, and he is violating the Torah. Verse 16. And he would have gladly filled his stomach with the pods that the swine were eating, and no one was giving anything to him. Now, if you've never slaughtered pigs, you have no idea how disgusting that stuff is. I have vague recollections of it. I honestly don't think I would dip my hand into that barrel, raise it to my mouth, and begin to try to swallow that stuff down. It would come out faster than it went down. But this boy is so desperate. He's willing to do that. But when he came to his senses, verse 17 is the pivotal verse. He came to his senses. He began to realize it all started with his bitter attitude towards his father, his demanding his share of the inheritance, going off and thinking he knew what was best for him, having the consequences of that sinful choices, living on a pig farm, having nothing to eat, no one would give him anything to eat, and he comes to his senses. Oh my goodness, what have I done? And he begins to reason to himself. How many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread, and I am dying here with hunger? Now he begins to recognize the generosity of his father, the loving care of his father, and how much his father provided for him. Even the slaves, here he was a son, an heir to the estate, but he reflects on how his father treated the slaves as if they were heirs in the sense of caring for them. He makes a decision once he comes to realize what a fool he has been. 18, I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. Now, He came to his senses, and in verse 18, he identifies what he has done as sinning against heaven and against his Father. That's very important. All sin is against God. There is no sin you and I commit that is not an affront to the holiness of God. Not all sin is against another human being. Many times, if it is, it's still against God first and foremost. And he's formulating this speech. He's trying to get over, he's trying to embrace the brokenness in his life and be able to truly humble himself when he returns to his Father. He continues in verse 19. He's not saying this yet. It's in his mind. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men. He just wants to get back into the Father's graces. I don't need to be an heir. In fact, if you die, I shouldn't get anything because of what I've done. Just make me one of your servants because I know I will be provided for. So once he's got this all straight in his mind, he makes a volitional decision. He got up and came to his father. Now, verse 20 is interesting. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion for him and ran and embraced and kissed him. All right, don't jump out of the culture here. The father, according to the Greek language, goes out every day in the direction that the boy might return from. So the father had some idea what foreign land the boy went off to. And every day he went out, standing, looking for the boy to return. And as this smelly, stained, stinking boy comes back in tattered clothes, maybe even barefoot, his father sees him and he feels compassion for him. I want you to also notice in verse 20, this father has got tremendous eyesight because he sees him a long way off. He doesn't have binoculars. And he felt compassion. In other words, like the Good Samaritan who saw that Jew beaten on the roadside and he felt compassion. The word compassion means the person wants to do something about the situation they find another in. And what does he do? He doesn't click his finger and tell slaves, go out there and get him and take him to the back of the barn and hose him down. Make him presentable. What does he do? He runs to him. I don't know how old this father is, but he runs to him. He's not repelled by the disdain, odor, appearance, and sin against him by this boy. He embraces him. He wraps his arms around this boy. Can you imagine the slaves watching this? Because they are, because he will turn to them in a minute and tell them to do something. Here, this evidently wealthy man bear hugs this boy. And he kisses him. Yeah, he kisses him. Typical Jewish greeting, kiss on the side of the face, the right and the left. Had the boy taken a bath? Had he showered up? Has he got Old Spice on? No. When he had this conversation in his head and he made a volitional decision to return, he was coming out of the pig pens. His father kisses him. And the boy, I believe, is thoroughly stunned. Verse 21, and the boy says, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight. That's a great start, son. You don't know how that makes my heart feel. I've sinned against heaven and in your sight. I am no longer worthy to be your son. And he was right. He was right. But the father doesn't let him finish his statement. But the father said to his slaves, quickly bring out the best robe. Put it on him. A robe identified that he was restored to the family. And put a ring on his finger. The ring symbolized the authority to do transactions of business for the father. And sandals on his feet. In other words, boy, what you left behind, I'm restoring to you because you've acknowledged you've sinned against heaven and against me. And bring the fatted calf. The fatted calf was kept in reserve for special occasions of celebration. It was a calf that enjoyed the rich diet to make them fat. In Colorado, when I was there for about a year, there were feedlots, and they had special hot shot feed. So when a herd came in, they could fatten them up within a month or less by feeding them twice a day with this hot shot feed. This calf is getting some very hot shot food. And kill it. Let us eat and celebrate. That was the purpose of the fatted calf. For this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and has been found. And they began to celebrate. This is the only verse that calls the boy lost. I don't know why in Bibles we don't have the lost sheep, the lost coin, or the lost son, because that's how the father called him. Now, we have a problem here. There are some figures here. First of all, the father represents God. The older brother represents the religious order of the day, the Pharisees and the scribes and the Sadducees. The young boy represents the publicans and the sinners and the harlots and the Zacchaeuses and those kind of people. Now, his older brother was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard all the music and dancing. What in the world is going on? I'm out here in the Middle East sun and the hot eastern wind, and you guys are celebrating? What is going on? And he summoned, verse 26, one of the servants and began inquiring what these things could be. And the slave said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has received him back safe and sound. That was the only concern of the father, for the boy to return, be restored, safe and sound. But the boy, the older brother, he became angry and was not willing to go in. He stood outside on the back porch with his arms crossed, pouting. And his father came out and began pleading with him, begging, come in, your brother's here. Come in and rejoice. Aren't you glad he's home? But he answered and said to his father, look, for so many years I have been serving you, and I have never neglected a command of yours. Now, that's the first inference that this boy makes about the younger brother being a slacker. He says, the older boy says, I've done everything you've asked me to do. I haven't disobeyed one commandment. You haven't found me lollygagging around. You told me to go hay the field, I hayed the field. You told me to go thresh grain, I threshed grain. You told me to go round up the sheep, I rounded up the sheep. I've done everything you've asked me to do. I haven't neglected one of your commands. Yet you have never given me a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. You haven't honored me for the work that I have done. Where is my reward? Where's my public recognition? But when this son of yours comes, the one who has devoured your wealth with prostitutes. Now, how in the world did he know that? Did the younger brother talk to his older brother saying, I got my half of the inheritance and I'm going to go down to Egypt or whatever, and man, I'm going to live it up? Did he talk to his older brother about his sexual exploits that he wanted to do? Did his older brother contribute to this conversation? But the older brother either assumes or he knows what his younger brother did. You killed the fatted calf for him. Your son embarrassed the name of our family with what he has done. I have kept your word. I have done everything. You haven't done anything for me. No public recognition. But he goes out and acts like a hobo and a bum, and he comes back and you kill the fatted calf. And the father said to him, Son, you have always been with me, and all that is mine is yours. The father is saying, you lacked nothing. Everything was available to you, just like it was to your younger brother. The father says, we had to celebrate and rejoice. I didn't want your younger brother slipping in and trying to live in isolation and seclusion. Remember, this is what David did with Absalom. He said it was necessary for us to celebrate. It was a time to publicly reaffirm he's been restored to the family. For this brother of yours was dead and has begun to live, and was lost and has been found. All right, what are some lessons for us today? The shepherd had confidence in the 99 to leave them and search for the one. The shepherd likely delegated the 99 to the care of his fellow shepherds. One of the things that I will bring to our attention on Sunday from the book the leadership is going through, Anatomy of a Revived Church, was tools of measurement. And one of the tools of measurement, and I'm going to be approaching it from a different perspective, is church attendance. Church attendance. Now, there are times when people are absent because of vacation, or that there is sickness, or in the past year there has been resistance to following CDC guidelines, and they have withdrawn from the church. But beloved, we need to be noticing those who are not attending. Whether you sit in the front row or the back row, who isn't here? And have they been gone for a couple of weeks? What is going on? Those who faithfully come don't need as much shepherding as those who are not coming, because there is probably a reason why they're not coming, and that needs to be found out so things can be discussed and talked about and cared for. The erring sheep needs both correction and comfort. The sheep that wanders away, if it's because of sin and rebellion, We need to go after that sheep. We need to correct, but we also need to comfort as well. That's what God does. God says, I'm going to discipline you, but then I will comfort you. Self-righteous sheep don't think they're lost and in need of restoration to the flock. They think they are okay. They will point to their spiritual resume of what they are doing for the kingdom. But are they being led by the Spirit to do these things? Are they doing those things in the arm of the flesh? Do they point to activity that validates their relationship, or do they point to the relationship validated by faith? The woman took specific steps of action to rediscover the lost coin because her reputation was at stake. Churches have reputations, and they can be tarnished. Sometimes the tarnishing is by the community that doesn't understand the church's convictions and stance in preaching from the Bible. Sometimes the church's reputation is tarnished by God's people because they are in public dispute among themselves, and it spills over into the community. The self-righteous forgets that everything offered to the returning sinner was always available to them. Now get this last one. Their works do not entitle them to the Father's blessing. Only a proper relationship. Only a proper relationship. I wonder if the Father never killed the fatted calf for the older boy because the relationship was based on performance instead of a father-son relationship. Now, the younger boy didn't have that relationship at first, but when he came back, he most certainly did. Thoughts, questions from great readers?
Understand. So Jesus was going through these. I guess my take is that the Pharisees didn't understand that it was about them. They were probably so self-righteous and indignant they didn't realize that he was talking about them, I'm guessing.
Well, I think that's a pretty good assumption based on scripture later on, where Jesus becomes more forthright, telling them you're blind and you're leading the blind. Near the last 1 year of his ministry or so, he began to be more straightforward in talking with the Pharisees about their attitude, first of all, towards God, towards him as Messiah, and towards the people that they should be shepherding. That's a good observation, Carl.
Yeah, so I guess him being Jesus, teaching by the use of parables was for the purpose of educating the apostles.
Exactly. If you go back to Matthew 13, when we started the parables, Jesus explained why he was teaching in parables, because the disciples asked him, why are you telling these stories? Yeah. It was to conceal truth from those who would not believe and reveal truth to those who would believe, and namely the disciples.
Okay, gotcha.
Any other thoughts or questions?
I just have a thought here.
Please.
These lessons are very heavy, and because the fact that with our human hearts, we overlook, like we don't understand why we aren't getting the credit when we're doing everything right. And then someone will come in that hasn't been in church in 20 years and we're supposed to fall all over them. And they're very good lessons for us.
Sue, that's a good observation, and I appreciate that. Your phraseology, I would lovingly challenge. I haven't seen anybody fall over anybody else at the church unless they're falling down. But I understand what you're saying. Some people have begun to drift back to Moxie here, and I use the word drift almost literally because you might not see them for another X, Y, and Z. Okay, but we have an obligation, a biblical obligation, to show Christian virtue and to greet them. So glad to have you here today. We've missed you. Some general Christian greeting where you don't have to fall over your tongue.
Yeah, and I think with the human heart, it's easy to want to just avoid doing that.
Yes. And you know what I think we communicate, Sue, by doing that? We validate in their mind the reason why they left. And one of the reasons in their mind probably is because the church doesn't care about me, which is probably furthest thing from the truth, because they neglect the numerous times that people have reached out to them and they have refused to communicate, refused to respond. If you got a clear conscience, Sue, that's all you need, girl.
That's right.
Okay. Well, that's a
And
good.
I'm gonna send you a new total, because I think I added a couple certificates, or at least one that I got from when we had the church. We had the meetings at the church. So I'm going to be sending you a revised total.
Yeah, just give me a revised number. I pretty well.
Okay.
I pretty well think I know who has gotten regular certificates, but I just don't want to exclude something. I'm coming up with something very, very special, and it will be a public recognition at the church when I do this.
Whoa.
Yeah, whoa. So you better put on your fancy duds, Sue Zaxer.
I will.
No blue jeans and cowboy boots, okay?
That's right.